Instead of complaining about anything, learn to be thankful for everything. Hashtag speaking from the heart. B. Fletcher.
At 6 p.m. on March 26, 2023, a routine dispatch call brought deputies to an apartment complex on Mallet Hill Road in northeast Columbia. The report was simple: multiple gunshots heard outside. When officers arrived, they located a 25-year-old woman on the ground, unresponsive, with visible gunshot wounds. Her name was Wynter Nicole Straw, a mental health officer and young mother with a quiet professional reputation. Within minutes, deputies identified a possible suspect linked to her: a 27-year-old man inside a unit within the same complex. As law enforcement approached the door, the situation shifted rapidly. The man refused to exit. He locked himself inside the apartment and remained barricaded. Crisis negotiators were deployed, and a perimeter was established. For nearly 3 hours, authorities attempted to communicate through phones, loudspeakers, and direct verbal contact. Negotiators aimed to determine his condition, his intent, and whether additional victims or weapons were inside. The standoff remained static, offering no clear indication of resolution. Then, without warning, a single gunshot was heard from within the apartment. Entry teams moved in. Inside, they found the man with a critical gunshot wound. He was transported to a hospital where he later died. With both individuals now deceased, the incident transitioned from an active standoff to a forensic investigation. Detectives began reconstructing the timeline: the relationship between the two, the final moments before the gunfire, and the events that led to the barricade. Their task: determine what transformed a private dispute into a two-fatality scene that ended within hours. Records, phone data, witness statements, and surveillance footage would become central to answering the core questions. What initiated the confrontation? Was there prior conflict? And how did a domestic situation escalate into a public emergency? You're watching Global Crime Venue, where viral fame hides chilling secrets. From TikTok dancers and Instagram couples to rising Facebook personalities, we reveal the dark side of the spotlight. When the perfect posts turn into tragedies, we break down exactly how it all unraveled. These aren't just online stories. They're real cases with real victims. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new case breakdown. In our next episode, we'll dive into another shocking story of love, control, and a hidden danger that no one saw coming. Here's the untold side of what really happened. Before the events of March 26th, Wynter Nicole Straw maintained a consistent routine centered on work, parenting responsibilities, and online content creation. Her social media presence, particularly on TikTok, showed frequent posting patterns that aligned with typical influencer activity. Short lifestyle clips, relationship-focused videos, and content featuring her daily environment. Her audience size was moderate but steadily growing, and her posts often emphasized stability, routine, and the appearance of a well-managed personal life. Away from social media, Wynter worked regular shifts at a facility within the mental health field. According to publicly documented job descriptions for similar positions, her duties likely included monitoring clients, completing written reports, and maintaining communication with other staff members. Her work schedule provided a structured framework to her days. Friends and colleagues who interacted with her during this period described her as punctual, consistent with communication, and rarely disruptive in work-related matters. This established pattern is important because it creates a baseline for evaluating changes in her personal life in the weeks leading up to the incident. Within this routine, Wynter's relationship with a man later identified as the suspect developed both online and offline. Their relationship was visible across her TikTok content, where he occasionally appeared in videos. These clips showed them performing routine activities such as car rides, casual home interactions, and synchronized lip-sync recordings. Observers interpreted these appearances as indicators of a functioning partnership, but social media posts typically represent curated snapshots rather than full accounts of private dynamics. Because of this, Investigators later examined her online interactions for any indications of tension or conflict not immediately apparent to viewers. In her offline life, the relationship progressed quickly. The two spent increased time together at the apartment complex on Mallet Hill Road, where the later incident occurred. Neighbors observed patterns consistent with a couple frequently sharing living space, joint arrivals, shared vehicle use, and routine presence at the residence. While no public records indicated previous domestic disturbance calls at the address, investigators reviewed dispatch logs to confirm whether prior complaints had been made. No confirmed patterns of law enforcement intervention were reported in the weeks preceding the shooting, indicating that any underlying issues had not previously escalated to police involvement. Communication records between Wynter and the suspect, analyzed later by investigators, provided insight into their routines. Text messages, call logs, and social media exchanges showed frequent communication throughout the day. These records are standard components in domestic-related investigations, offering a chronological view of conversations, disagreements, and behavioral shifts. While the specific content of these messages has not been publicly released, investigators noted that the tone and frequency of exchanges in the final days would be evaluated to determine whether any disputes, warnings, or threats appeared before the shooting. Friends and acquaintances provided additional perspective by supplying statements to detectives. These interviews were routine and aimed at identifying behavioral changes, arguments, or conflicts that might help construct the timeline leading up to the incident. Statements collected described the suspect as a regular presence in Wynter's daily life. Several individuals indicated that the relationship appeared stable to outside observers, though none could confirm the nature of private interactions. Investigators gathered these accounts as part of a broader process of cross-referencing witness statements with digital evidence and physical timelines. Wynter's residential environment also formed an important part of detectives' analysis. The apartment complex housed multiple units with close proximity, meaning activity occurring outside was often heard or seen by neighboring residents. Surveillance cameras located around common areas were later reviewed for movements leading up to the shooting. These cameras could capture arrivals, departures, and any unusual activity near the building entrance or parking area. Footage obtained from the complex provided investigators with timestamps essential for reconstructing the moments before the gunfire. Her day-to-day life remained publicly consistent. Work shifts, content creation, childcare responsibilities, and time spent with the suspect. Nothing recorded in the initial findings pointed to abrupt changes in her routine prior to the shooting. This stability became an important contrast to the sudden escalation on March 26, prompting investigators to further analyze communications, movements, and interactions within the final 24 hours. The final 24 hours before the March 26 incident were reconstructed by investigators through digital data, surveillance footage, neighbor statements, and physical findings at the scene. This allowed authorities to track movements, communication patterns, and key actions without relying on assumptions or emotional interpretation. The timeline begins on March 25. Throughout that morning and early afternoon, both Wynter and the suspect showed normal patterns of activity on their phones. Records reflected isolated calls, brief messages, and standard usage that investigators later confirmed as consistent with their typical daily routines. No irregular activity appeared in these earlier logs. Footage from the apartment complex placed Wynter at the location in the late afternoon of March 25. She entered the building in a routine manner and proceeded directly to the unit associated with the suspect. From that point until the early hours of March 26, there were no documented disturbances, police calls, or reports of unusual activity from neighbors. During the overnight hours, surveillance did not capture significant movement around the unit. Between approximately midnight and sunrise, phone data from both individuals showed long periods of inactivity, indicating no major interactions or digital exchanges during that time frame. Investigators cross-checked this with prior days to determine whether any deviation existed, but the pattern aligned with normal nighttime inactivity. On the morning of March 26, neither individual showed notable engagement on social media or extended communication with outside contacts. Investigators noted this as part of the timeline but did not identify it as a direct indicator of conflict. Instead, it was categorized simply as reduced activity. Throughout the late morning and early afternoon, no witnesses reported disturbances coming from the unit. Movement inside the apartment was limited, with no audible arguments or unusual sounds recorded by neighboring residents. Phone records further showed minimal communication outward from either device during this period. Activity increased later in the afternoon. Around 5 p.m., neighbors in nearby units reported hearing movement inside the apartment. These reports described general activity rather than signs of a dispute. No formal complaints were made, and no calls were placed to law enforcement prior to the shooting. The sequence of escalation began shortly before 6 p.m. A witness near the complex reported hearing a sharp sound resembling a gunshot. Moments later, additional shots were heard in rapid succession. Multiple individuals near the area contacted emergency services, reporting gunfire outside or near one of the buildings. Deputies arrived at the location at approximately 6 p.m. They found Wynter outside the building with gunshot wounds. Her position on the ground suggested movement from inside the building toward the exterior before collapsing. The area was immediately secured, and emergency services were requested. Detectives later used the location of spent shell casings, the trajectory of the rounds, and her position to confirm the direction of movement. Within minutes of the shooting, the suspect retreated into the apartment and locked the door. When deputies attempted initial contact, he did not respond and made no attempt to exit. This refusal resulted in a barricade situation. A perimeter was established, and crisis negotiators began structured attempts to communicate directly through verbal commands and electronic contact methods. For nearly 3 hours, no progress was made. Negotiators attempted repeated communication cycles, following standard procedure for barricaded individuals, but there was no meaningful response from inside the unit. The suspect's movements during this period could not be visually confirmed due to the locked and obstructed entry. At approximately 8:15 p.m., a single gunshot was heard inside the apartment. Tactical units entered after forcing the door, where they located the suspect with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was transported from the scene to a hospital for treatment, but was later pronounced deceased. The timeline established a clear sequence based solely on verifiable data: normal early day activity, no reported disturbances, abrupt escalation near 6 p.m., a subsequent barricade, and a self-inflicted gunshot concluding the standoff. This structured chronology formed the foundation for the investigative steps that followed in the next phases of the case analysis. Once investigators identified the suspect as the individual involved in the shooting and subsequent barricade, the next step was to build a detailed background profile. This included verifying his identity, examining his residential and employment history, evaluating legal records, and reviewing interpersonal behavior across various settings. The goal was to establish factual context separate from the incident timeline. The suspect was a 27-year-old male whose past residential history showed multiple moves within South Carolina. Public records linked him to several previous addresses, indicating short-term stays at various apartment complexes and shared living spaces. These relocations appeared linked to employment changes or personal circumstances, rather than evictions or behavioral issues. Detectives reviewed leasing histories and landlord notes to determine if any prior disturbances or police involvement were documented at his former residences. Available records showed only standard rental information and provided no evidence of past violent incidents. Employment verification showed that the suspect worked in a series of temporary or short-duration positions. These roles were primarily in manual labor sectors, warehouse environments, and entry-level service jobs. Investigators contacted former employers to review conduct, attendance patterns, and any relevant disciplinary history. Their feedback described him as quiet, with minimal interpersonal engagement and no recorded workplace conflicts. These findings helped investigators determine whether there was a documented pattern of aggression or instability in professional settings. None was identified. A review of his criminal background revealed minor legal issues, such as traffic violations and administrative infractions. There were no prior charges related to violence, domestic disturbances, or weapons offenses. Detectives still documented these findings to complete his background profile, but none of the previous infractions suggested behaviors associated with escalation to severe violence. Financial assessments showed inconsistent employment income, scattered short-term accounts, and unpaid minor debts. This pattern was consistent with his irregular work history. Investigators evaluated whether financial strain could have acted as a contributing factor, but no direct financial conflict relevant to the incident was identified. Still, these details contributed to understanding his general living conditions. His digital footprint was limited. The suspect maintained a small number of social media accounts with minimal public activity. Posts were infrequent and generally unrelated to personal disputes or significant life events. Investigators reviewed direct messages, account activity logs, deleted posts, and connected contacts to determine whether any online conflicts or threats preceded the shooting. No digital indicators of planned violence or pre-event hostility were located in the reviewed material. Interviews with acquaintances, former neighbors, and co-workers provided additional insight into his interpersonal conduct. Most individuals described him as private and minimally communicative. He did not frequently initiate conversations and rarely discussed personal matters. These accounts were consistent across several settings, indicating a pattern of social withdrawal rather than outward conflict. Detectives included these statements to evaluate whether any notable behavioral changes had been observed prior to the incident. None of the interviewees reported drastic shifts or escalating behavior. Investigators also attempted to document information from past relationships. While few records were available, the individuals who provided statements described disagreements typical of interpersonal relationships but did not report prior violent acts or threats. These accounts were relevant because they helped determine whether any behavioral patterns existed that could inform the events of March 26. No documented history of domestic violence emerged from these reviews. Physical examination of the suspect's living space provided practical data about his habits. Items within the apartment were consistent with routine daily usage, with no signs of long-term preparation or planning. Detectives noted the general order of the environment, verifying that there were no indicators of premeditated staging. The items found supported the broader conclusion that the suspect led a lifestyle characterized by privacy and limited outward engagement. Taken together, the suspect's background showed irregular employment, financial instability, minimal criminal history, limited digital activity, and a generally withdrawn interpersonal profile. These findings provided investigators with context for understanding his behavioral patterns without repeating elements tied to the incident timeline or Wynter's daily life. This background framework set the stage for analyzing the suspect's actions during the standoff and the escalation that occurred on March 26. Following confirmation that the suspect remained inside the apartment and refused to exit, law enforcement implemented a structured barricade response consistent with departmental protocols for armed, non-compliant individuals. The goal was to contain the situation, minimize risk to civilians, and allow negotiators to engage while tactical personnel prepared contingency measures. A secure perimeter was immediately established around the building, covering all potential exit points, entrances, and windows. Residents in nearby units were directed to remain indoors or relocate temporarily. Officers were assigned fixed observation points to maintain constant monitoring of the suspect's location within the structure, while preventing interference from civilians or external traffic. The perimeter remained active until the conclusion of the standoff. A command post was set up to manage coordination between tactical units, crisis negotiators, and support teams. Radio channels were consolidated, ensuring seamless communication across responding personnel. Supervisors assigned specific roles to units, including monitoring, negotiation, entry preparation, and emergency medical coordination. Standard procedure required real-time documentation of actions, observations, and decision-making processes. Crisis negotiators attempted to establish contact through direct verbal communication at the apartment door, loudspeakers, and phone calls. Structured prompts were repeated at scheduled intervals to determine the suspect's willingness to surrender and confirm his physical and mental condition. No verbal responses were received, and no signs of activity inside the unit were observable. The lack of engagement guided negotiators to continue periodic attempts without escalating entry prematurely. Tactical teams reviewed building layouts and structural features to identify safe entry points, potential hazards, and areas where the suspect could take cover. These assessments informed contingency plans, including the location of protective barriers and the sequence for room clearing. Law enforcement also maintained situational awareness regarding external environmental factors, such as neighboring units, sight lines, and vehicle access routes, to ensure the safety of both personnel and civilians. Medical personnel were staged nearby as standard protocol, prepared to respond immediately if injuries occurred during intervention. Their presence was maintained throughout the standoff, with contingency plans in place for rapid deployment once law enforcement deemed entry safe. Negotiators documented every communication attempt, noting time, method, and response in accordance with operational procedure. This record helped command personnel evaluate whether continued negotiation was viable or if tactical entry was necessary. Repeated non-compliance indicated the suspect's unwillingness to cooperate, prompting a reassessment of intervention strategy based on safety priorities and procedural guidelines. After approximately 3 hours, officers reported hearing a gunshot from inside the apartment. This auditory confirmation prompted a transition from negotiation to tactical intervention. The breach was executed using specialized equipment designed to gain entry through residential locks while minimizing risk. Tactical teams advanced methodically, securing each section of the unit to ensure no additional threats were present. Inside the apartment, the suspect was located with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. No other individuals were present. Medical personnel were granted immediate access to assess and transport the individual. Following this, the tactical team conducted a full room-by-room clearance and secured the unit for investigative procedures. Once the immediate threat was neutralized, the scene was transitioned from tactical operations to evidence collection. Officers documented the apartment layout, photographed locations of key items, and logged all materials for forensic analysis. Each action, including negotiation attempts, tactical positioning, and breach procedure, was recorded for internal review, as is standard for barricade incidents involving firearms. Following the resolution of the barricade, investigators conducted a methodical forensic examination of the apartment unit and surrounding areas to document conditions, collect evidence, and reconstruct actions without relying on witness accounts alone. The examination prioritized physical evidence preservation, spatial measurements, and trace material analysis. The interior of the apartment was documented with detailed photographs and diagrams. Officers measured room dimensions, noting furniture placement, door positions, and potential obstructions. These measurements were intended to identify areas where evidence could be located and to understand the spatial relationship of objects relevant to events that occurred inside the unit. Items collected included a firearm, spent ammunition, and materials linked to the suspect. Each item was logged and tagged according to chain of custody procedures to maintain evidentiary integrity. Gunshot residue, GSR swabs were taken from the weapon, nearby surfaces, and the suspect to confirm discharge activity and establish points of contact. Laboratory analysis of these samples was performed to provide objective evidence of firearm use and transfer patterns. Ballistics examinations were extended to the exterior of the building, including the area where the victim was located. Shell casings were recovered, documented, and analyzed to determine caliber and firing sequence. Trajectory studies were conducted to evaluate angles and distances of projectiles, aiding in reconstructing the movement of both parties and confirming positions relative to evidence. Fingerprint analysis was conducted on doors, windows, and commonly handled surfaces within the apartment. These prints were compared to the suspect and victim to verify physical contact with specific objects. Latent prints were also cross-checked against law enforcement databases to exclude the presence of third parties. This process provided verification of interactions without relying on observational accounts. Electronic devices, including cell phones and tablets, were seized and examined. Investigators extracted metadata, call and messaging logs, and timestamps to create a chronological framework of digital communication. Analysis of these records supported the reconstruction of activity within the apartment and corroborated surveillance data collected from common areas of the complex. Environmental and spatial evidence was recorded through 3D scanning and high-resolution photography. These methods preserved lines of sight, object placement, and room configuration for later review. Lighting conditions, window placements, and furniture orientation were all documented to assess visibility and potential exposure points within the unit. This allowed investigators to analyze movement and positioning in detail without altering the scene. Trace evidence collection included swabs of biological material, such as blood, skin cells, and other organic residues. Laboratory DNA testing was performed on samples collected from clothing and surfaces to establish contact events and verify individual identification. Fibers and particulate matter were also analyzed to confirm presence in multiple locations, assisting in determining interactions between the suspect, victim, and environment. Evidence from both the interior and exterior was systematically catalogued in a centralized case file. This included photographs, diagrams, ballistic reports, residue analyses, fingerprint results, and digital extractions. Each component was independently verified and cross-referenced with others to establish an accurate factual reconstruction. The forensic findings offered detailed insight into physical actions, spatial relationships, and environmental conditions, supporting the investigative reconstruction of the incident. By combining residue testing, ballistics, trace material, and digital data, investigators created a comprehensive framework that allowed the events to be understood objectively, without relying solely on witness statements or assumptions. This process provided investigators with verifiable data that would inform subsequent analysis, including behavioral evaluation, timeline verification, and correlation with surveillance and environmental records. The evidence collected in this stage formed the foundation for interpreting the dynamics of the incident in later sections. Following the deaths of both individuals, medical examiners conducted full autopsies to determine the physiological cause, manner, and timing of death. The examinations followed standard forensic protocols, including external inspection, internal dissection, tissue analysis, and toxicology testing. The victim, a 25-year-old female, sustained multiple penetrating injuries consistent with gunfire. Autopsy identified 3 distinct entry wounds located on the upper torso, specifically affecting the chest and shoulder areas. Examination of tissue and organs showed trajectories through the thoracic cavity, with one wound directly compromising major blood vessels. Hemorrhage in the thoracic cavity and partial lung collapse were documented, indicating rapid blood loss. Damage to the heart and aorta contributed directly to exsanguination, establishing the immediate cause of death. No defensive wounds were observed on the hands or arms, suggesting limited ability to shield herself at the time of injury. Internal evaluation revealed no evidence of prior trauma or unrelated pathological conditions. Toxicology analysis of blood and urine indicated no significant presence of alcohol, prescription medications, or illicit substances that could have affected motor function. These results established that the victim's physical condition did not contribute to vulnerability during the incident. The suspect, a 27-year-old male, sustained a single penetrating injury to the upper chest. Examination confirmed the wound was self-inflicted, with a trajectory penetrating the heart and major vessels, resulting in rapid exsanguination. Gunshot residue analysis confirmed firearm discharge from his hands, supporting a self-inflicted cause. No defensive injuries were noted. Toxicology analysis revealed only trace levels of common substances such as nicotine and caffeine, with no impairment factors identified. Internal examination showed no medical conditions that would have influenced the lethality of the injury. Both autopsies included evaluation of clothing, superficial abrasions, and minor contusions. Clothing was analyzed for gunpowder residue, blood spatter patterns, and other trace evidence. The suspect's clothing and hands tested positive for recent firearm discharge, consistent with forensic findings regarding the timing and mechanics of the fatal shot. Forensic imaging, including X-rays and detailed photographs, documented projectile trajectories and internal damage. These records assisted investigators in correlating internal findings with ballistic evidence, providing precise information regarding the angle, distance, and effects of each shot. Measurements of wound channels and tissue damage were included in official case files for use in reconstructing the dynamics of the incident. The autopsy findings confirmed that the victim's death resulted from multiple gunshot wounds causing rapid hemorrhage and organ trauma, while the suspect's death resulted from a single self-inflicted gunshot wound. No toxicological or medical factors contributed to either death, establishing a direct correlation between the physical injuries and immediate cause of mortality. These results allowed investigators to accurately assess the lethality, sequence, and physiological effects of the injuries without relying on circumstantial evidence. The findings provided a factual framework for understanding the timing and mechanics of the incident, as well as supporting the reconstruction of critical actions during the standoff. The documentation produced during autopsy, including photographic evidence, internal measurements, and residue analysis, was integrated into the central case file. This information supplemented ballistic, forensic, and environmental analyses, enabling a complete and objective assessment of the fatal events without extrapolation or assumption. And that concludes today's case. But remember, this is just one of countless stories the world has yet to uncover. Here on Global Crime Venue, our mission is to uncover the facts, honor the victims who can no longer speak, and make sure their stories are never erased. If what you heard today made you think, know this, more cases are on the way that will shock you, haunt you, and change the way you look at social media and the world around you. Be sure to subscribe, tap the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. New investigations are released regularly. And trust me, you'll want to be here when the next story breaks. Before you leave, share your thoughts in the comments. What stood out to you most in this case? Your voice keeps these stories alive. Until we meet again, stay cautious, stay informed, and never forget, justice starts with truth. Global Crime Venue, uncovering the stories behind the screen.